Hi all. So I really want to provide an account of what my beliefs are that may have occurred in the past. Just provide the reasons why I think that, and just to give a little history to it. And it's hard to know where to start because actually, kind of my belief is that we don't know our true origins. We don't know earliest history. Either that's because we never had enough sufficient records to know, or perhaps because those records over time have deteriorated, there's less of them, and there could be different reasons for that. And it's disputed what our early origins are. Many people do believe we came out of Africa, and my own beliefs is basically that we were essentially at one point one race, one group, one homogenous group of people, and that I suppose you could describe that as the Garden of Eden era, that we were living as one. Not that everything was necessarily good and there weren't good and bad things and perhaps divisions within that, but that we were like kind of one big village almost, one nation, you could call it, but we were one race as well. And that over the years, people have migrated out from that one area, traveling to different areas of the world. My own belief is that at that time, we had a belief in one God. We had one understanding. There may have been many understandings, actually, of one God. People may have been at different abilities and levels and different positions. But I think that there was one core belief. And there were those that decided to leave and they didn't believe, or they had their own reasons not to. And there were divisions within the tribe, and some tribes decided to leave and to separate themselves. And this then created outsiders who were outside of the main original homogenous group. And then those that remained in that position. And actually, geneticists have been able to trace the movements of different tribes around the world. And they actually trace back to Africa, our common ancestor. And that's, to me, interesting that we could have all potentially come from one area, one nation, one race, and perhaps even one belief. Perhaps we were under one system of rules. But that's my belief anyway. Maybe people had different reasons for separating. And of course, I think it was meant to be that, that people went out and populated the world and discovered other areas of the world. I think we were meant to separate for a reason. Perhaps there was a good reason for that and a bad reason too. The good could have been that we had genuine areas of differences and different lessons, therefore, to go off and learn about ourselves, about the world. Different understandings of God, different understandings of morality, different understandings of ourselves and of the earth and what it means to be who we are, and different lessons to go off and learn. And I think that's probably the good motive of why we could have separated, I think. But I think there's probably bad motives too. It could well be that there were those that wanted to live separate from others and didn't want to share or didn't want to be part of one group one race, wanted to be separate. And so there could be potentially good and bad motives. It's the reason I think that's important, why our beliefs about our origins are important, is because that's sort of tied into our beliefs about our possible future destiny as well. What this desire, and I believe we've had this long-term desire to become one again. And I think that's been the whole driving force of all the good parts of globalization. Obviously, there's a lot of bad too, but you wouldn't have tolerated or put up with any of the bad if there weren't some good things that had driven it also. And I think that desire to want to connect to other people from different parts of the world, to understand them, if not agree, but actually to find that commonality, that common humanity in others. I think that there's that primitive desire there. And I would say that that is to reconnect to something from an early age. But I think my own personal belief is that earlier age was the time when we as humans were almost like children. We were young, infantile. We didn't really have the control and the power and the knowledge that we've gained over the centuries and millenniums, in fact. We didn't have the ability, for example, to build such megalithic superstructures and to design vast, complex cities and megalopolises and transport networks and so on. We were very basic and primitive, like a young child. We lacked that ability in technology and in our knowledge, therefore. We lived very humbly, very modestly, probably with just very simple straw houses or houses of wood and the like, and just hunting and gathering and looking after each other and ourselves. That would have been our main preoccupation, guarding ourselves from dangerous animals, but like young children also, enjoying ourselves, dancing, singing, all that kind of thing, that camaraderie of gathering together. And I think that's my real belief, really, that we all had that shared origin once, that we came from one, and therefore naturally there is that desire, that instinct within us to get back to one as well. But there's also that fear, naturally and rightfully as well, because just as there could be good motives to want to escape a one nation or a one tribe or even one family or a one world, there could be bad motives, but there could be good motives. Supposing it wasn't ruled by God, supposing it had been taken over by others who didn't have ethical designs, or that they had false ideas about God or morality in general, So there could be good motives to want to leave that, couldn't there? And good fears of that. You think about the idea of us all being one together in one nation. It could be a utopian thing, but it equally could be a dystopian thing, couldn't it? And I think you'd be really dishonest with yourselves and other people if you don't acknowledge that there is both a genuine desire to want to reconnect to that oneness of humanity, to see that commonality within other people, and to want to somehow have something meaningful, purposeful that binds us together, something honest and truthful, sacred and genuine, but that there isn't also that fear of being bound together by something false and delusional and malicious and that's wrong and that's harmful. And I think we all feel that, if I'm honest. I think that's something, and I think it comes down to if you want to look at it in simple terms, how we relate to a family, actually, if we are one human family. K.D. Lang said, the psychologist, said that family was the root of all madness. But in actual fact, the absence of family could equally be said to be the root of madness too. A family that's run for bad reasons, where some members of the family have more control than others, that take advantage of each other, it becomes institutionalized madness in a sense, doesn't it? Something that anyone that's brought up with that and has had experiences of that, quite naturally, understandably, has their concerns and fears about such a thing, but at the same time, there's a kind of madness in being alone and alienated and separate from any family too. There's a madness that comes from the collectiveness, that sharedness of being around other people within a crowd, that conformity, that expectation to fit in with other people, regardless of whether it's good or bad, ethical or not. And there's a type of madness, but also a type of sanity that one can associate with being together with other people. Because there's a good and there's a bad aspect to sharing things with others, isn't there? Sharing others' insight and love and truth, but sharing others' delusions and hates and falseness, and we've all got some delusions, we've all got some problems in our world. So when we enter into a relationship with others, there's a risk in that, so we do it cautiously. But just as there's that type of madness with other people and sharing that group, sharing the good and the bad potentially, there's a type of madness that comes from being alone, but there's a type of sanity that comes from being alone as well. It's always a double-edged sword, isn't it? Whether in a crowd or whether alone. There's good and bad in each, really. We've got to try and see the good, whether we are in a situation with others or whether we are more isolated and alone. And being alone a lot, there's a type of madness within that potentially. You might lack perspective and awareness about other people's beliefs and about your own behaviour, because there's no one to discipline you or to critique you, to tell you if you're going right or wrong. You can't get a variety of different opinions. But then in a crowd, can you know who to trust and whose opinions are valid and worthy, and by what standards you judge that, and how you can objectively and ethically decide that. And that's an ancient riddle, and one that we still struggle with thousands of years later. And this type of madness that we suffer when we're alone, lacking that insight of other people, having those delusions of grandeur sometimes, or equally delusions that we're worthless, that what we're doing is meaningless somehow. We also have a potential sanity, something redeeming about being alone as well, that we're more independent, that we're not influenced by others' delusions or others' negativity. Although, with that double-edged sword, we have our own delusions that we may lack awareness of too. I think it's probably sensible to try and have some sort of balance in life where you have time alone and some time with others as well. Sometimes you don't get to choose that, of course. Sometimes you're sentenced to spending a lot of time alone, and sometimes you're sentenced to having to spend time with lots of other people. And either way, you're having to sort of make the best of whatever the situation is, I suppose. And there can be difficulty and hardship, but also potentially also some good, depending on how we use those situations, And so they're my kind of theories, really, that I do believe that we had at one point a oneness that we once shared with others, and that it's that drives us on to try and reconnect with others from different races and different nations and people from different ages and different backgrounds, that we feel compelled to want to reconnect with. And yet, as well as that compulsion and that desire to reconnect, we also feel a mistrust and a wariness too. And there's that tension, isn't it, that we all feel between that desire to reconnect, but also that fear of doing so, And I think it's something that we've probably collectively felt for many years. I'm not sure about this story that the world was always separate, and that there were all these different kingdoms or empires of the world that were very separate from each other, and that we've been gradually reconnecting over the centuries, and that's built up towards this more ever connecting, globalizing process. I just think history is long, it's difficult, it's laborious to even understand a small amount of it, really, and fraught with difficulties, because of course it's difficult to know how much of recorded history is accurate and how much is biased from the perspective of those who've written it and their own viewpoints. It's quite possible that there's been various points in time when the various different empires or kingdoms or different nations of the world have been more in contact with each other and then more separate with each other. I personally feel that after the initial separations, that there were whole long different times of fluctuations where there were increasing separations followed by increasing togetherness and reconnections, and followed by increasing separations again, and that there's been a whole long process potentially. But I don't know, it's very hard to know very ancient history. It's steeped in legend and mythology the further you go back, and the further you go back, naturally, the less we know about things. The less evidence there is that's preserved archaeologically, and even the linguistic evidence that still remains is just a remnant of what there probably was. And really, who is there today that can really decipher and accurately translate what the ancient scribes were actually saying anyway? And then even the later languages that can more accurately be translated, even then, we're not totally sure how representative that sample that remains is of actually the whole civilization of that era. So it's very difficult for us to accurately know. Even recent history can sometimes be difficult. Even our own histories can be. Our own memories of things. We can remember things wrongly sometimes. Other people can too. We can have our own prejudices and biases sometimes. Or, even with our good intentions, sometimes we remember things wrongly. Sometimes, we don't have all the accurate information. And so even recent history can sometimes be difficult too. So how much more so is ancient history much more difficult, Our early origins are shrouded in mystery, really, and there's much debate and speculation because of that, And I don't claim that my theory and beliefs are absolutely right, and I might be wrong. Maybe we didn't come from one common place and time and nation, maybe we weren't. Maybe that's wrong, but that's my belief anyway. There's much other speculation that would suggest otherwise. There are others that believe that there are those that came from another planet and bred with humanity. Beliefs like the Nephilim, for example. that there were alien beings or some other spirits from another realm that bred with humanity. I don't really find any credible evidence to support that, just because I feel and I see that everybody has the same biological makeup today, and we have the same emotional feelings too. The same kind of grief, the same anger, the same joy. We have the same material needs, the same emotional needs as well. We've got the same biological needs as well. So I see in essence that we are one humanity, but that we've been divided so long, and for such that we have really developed such different ideas, and that we really have got different beliefs that have developed over a long period of time. But I still do feel that there are common beliefs that can transcend those differences as well. But I just think it's a fascinating area, because I think there is that tension between wanting to reconnect as one humanity, but also that natural fear and concern about the potential risks of that also.